Hello YouTube, welcome back to the conservatory, and yeah, we're getting very much closer to the finish line. Really all that we need to do now is refit the bodywork, and then we're ready for the track day where we'll go and try it out and see how the bike goes. So as you can see, I've got some pretty second-hand looking bodywork. It's not the best, there's a few cracks and splits, and more importantly there's quite a bit of damage to it. So what we're going to have to do before we can refit all the various brackets on the bike to take the bodywork is I need to do some bodywork repairs. Now this particular set of bodywork is actually fiberglass replica bodywork. So that makes it a lot easier for repairing it with fiberglass repairs. And there's some slight oddities to this kit. Now originally this kit was fitted to an NC29 rather than NC23 for some reason. And one of the things that happened as a result is they actually cut out the fairings to take crash bungs just here. Now obviously that's just going to leave a gaping hole for us, which we don't really want. So I'm going to have to fill those. Also we've got various other little splits and cracks, and we've got some extra holes, and certainly this one down here. As you can see, the fiberglass is actually broken around the hole. So we have the delights of fiberglassing to look forward to. So what I'm going to do, we're going to move the camera over to the bench, and we will start doing some fiberglassing. Deep joy. So here we are back at the little workbench, and I'm going to start with these two panels first. And as you can see, I've got this cut out here to repair on both of them, and there's a couple of holes that need patching up and re-drilling. So I took myself off down to Halfords, and I bought one of their little fiberglass repair kits. It's not the most economical way of buying fiberglass, but it's the easiest. So fiberglass, or glass reinforced plastic as the name implies, is exactly that. It's glass strands, and they either come as a mat, which is what we get in this kit, or alternatively you can actually get it where it's woven. And the woven variety is a lot easier to work with, but obviously this is what comes in the kit, so this is what we'll be using. I definitely prefer the woven variety. Like I said, when you cut it, it doesn't disintegrate, but you'll see that as we go along. So the first thing I've done is I've taken the sanding disc, and I've actually sanded back the areas where we're going to be applying the new fiberglass. Done that for two reasons. One, we actually want to thin down the area so we can sand it back to more or less the original thickness. And two, we want a nice clean surface for everything to bond up to. Obviously, as the name implies, glass reinforced plastic. Like I said, you've got all these strands of glass embedded in the resin, and it's definitely the sort of stuff you don't want to be breathing. So make sure you wear a mask when you're sanding this stuff back, but I think we're all getting kind of used to that these days, so it shouldn't be much of an issue. And then the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to clean everything up with a bit of brake cleaner, just to get rid of any last sort of residues of oil or anything that's going to prevent the new fiberglass from bonding in place. And also remove all the sanding dust. So there's one. And now the other. I'll try to make a bit of a bid for freedom. As you can see, this panel has obviously had a previous repair at some point in its life. Like I said, these panels aren't the prettiest, but with a bit of effort, a bit of filler, and a good few hours of sanding and painting, we'll probably get them to come up reasonably respectable. Okay, so that's them cleaned up. Now we need to cut our patches. So fiberglass matting can just be cut with a pair of scissors fairly easily. And I haven't really got enough space on this workbench for this, but here we go. So I'm just going to cut a series of patches for each hole. So the first one, I want it about the same size as the actual hole itself, because that's going to sit in there for the first layer, and then we're going to have subsequent patches that will go over the top. So with each patch I want to get successively bigger so that they all overlap. Like I said, it's not something you need to be too neat about. Okay, so there's my three patches for that hole. A couple of patches. For the other two holes, as you can see, this glass gets everywhere, and again I'm wearing gloves purely because you really don't want glass fibres embedded in your skin. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to get the racer's favourite, bit of duct tape. I'm just going to fix that to the back of the panel to give us something to fiberglass up against. There's one. There's two. There's three. Right, so you can see now we've got something to lay our fiberglass up against. and hopefully stop resin pouring everywhere. Okay, so I'm just going to stop you there while I go and do the same for the other one. And we'll come back in a few minutes when it's time to actually start the fiberglassing itself. Okay, so I've cut all my various little patches and applied the tape to the back of the panel. So now we just need to mix up the resin. The annoying thing with this kit is they supply you a big old tub of resin, loads of fiberglass and the hardener, which I can open actually. But they only ever supply you with one mixing cup and one brush. The problem is, once you've used this once, you pretty much have to throw it away. So what I tend to do is pop down to the pound shop and get myself a load of little cocktail shot glasses to mix the actual resin up in. And also I found you can get sort of these nasty little paint brushes in their kiddies paint kits. So stock up on shot glasses and cheap paint brushes, because they really are, use them once and throw them away. I haven't got, my local pound shop didn't actually have any shot glasses, so what I'm going to use is cap off an empty spray can. So let's have a look. So I'm going to do myself about 45 millilitres or 40 millilitres. Resin. So I'm going to use the supplied mixing cup purely for measuring. And then the instructions say to add 1 pea-sized bead of hardener for every 10 millilitres of resin. So let's see if we can squeeze this out without getting it everywhere. Of course it does help. Two, 3, and 4 peas. Now you have to work quite fast with this stuff because it does go off after about 10 to 15 minutes, so you haven't got a lot of time to work. Once you've mixed it all up, you don't really get a lot of time to work everything. Okay. So the first job is to paint a layer of the actual resin over the area where you want the fiberglass to bond. Take your first patch, and this one should just sit in the side area we want. Then another layer of resin, work it all in. And now the second patch that's going to overlap slightly. And as you can see, it tends to move around while you're trying to wash the resin in. And then our final large patch. Be quite generous with the resin, because the resin is the main component. Obviously we are going to sand it all back again once it's dried. That's that done. And now we do the same for the next little hole. It really is horribly messy, this game, but right. As you can see, what tends to happen is this horrible matte stuff all starts to disintegrate on you as you're using it. Because with the best will in the world, you just cannot help getting it on the fingers of your gloves. Right, that's the first panel done. And hopefully I can get the second one done before all the resin dries. Right, well I'm going to carry on with this. Obviously there's more repairs to do on the actual belly pan and the nose cone. So I think I'm in for a few hours of fiberglassing and generally making a mess. So once it's all done and cured, we'll be back to see how it's turned out. So I'll see you shortly. Well, here we are a few days later and fiberglass is all cured. I've finished the fiberglass, did have to put a few extra layers on just to even things out a little bit. But you can see where we filled it there and up here. Now this does need quite a bit more sanding off. It's pretty rough and ready there. And to sand it, basically went at it with a flat disc in the angry grinder, and that got the bulk of it off. And then I've sprayed a bit of high build primer on there, just giving it a quick rub down with some 120 and some 400 grit sandpaper, or wet and dry, and that's just going to highlight where it all needs further filling and tidying up. Now before we do all the filling and the tidying up and get nice pretty paint on there, it's probably a good time now to do a trial fit of all the fairings, and obviously I've got some more holes to re-drill. I've got to get things lined up, because invariably you're going to end up scratching your paintwork if you're not careful, and it is going to be a case of drilling pilot holes, checking everything lines up, taking it off, enlarging the hole, checking it, and eventually we'll get all the fairings fitted and sorted. So the first thing we need to do before we can actually fit the fairings is I do need to fit the remaining brackets. Obviously we've got the top fairing support and obviously the top mount and centre mount here built into the speedo bracket. So I really just need to fit these side mounts here. There's a little belly pan mount that I need to fit over the other side, and we're going to have to remove this side stand because it tends to foul these fairings, and we are going to make up a little bracket just to support the belly pan there. As standard, there are extra mounts at the front here, but I've never used them on a race bike, so I'm not going to bother on this one. Generally the fairings hold themselves on pretty well without them. So let's get started with bolting on the various brackets. So after I'd cleaned the frame, I did make sure I put the bolts in for these brackets into the frame, just so I knew exactly where they were. Otherwise they tend to get lost, of course. So let's get this bracket. And bolt them on. What you tend to find with these brackets is they are the first things to get damaged in a crash, and even if they don't get damaged in a crash, they tend to get a bit bent and abused just by knocking them. So there's probably going to be a little bit of tweaking required just to get them to the right shape, which will probably end up damaging the fresh paintwork. So again, after we've tweaked everything and got it all to line up, I may have to go over and just touch up the paint a bit. Fitting fairings is one of those jobs that will definitely test your patience and take a disproportionately large amount of time to do. But it's all got to be done, and it's worth it in the long run. So I fitted that bracket. The next thing we need to fit is this part, which is the support for the air tubes, because obviously they're integral in holding the front fairing in place. So they're just held on by these little plastic, almost like a rule plug really. What you tend to find though is that the thread goes on the plastic screws. These ones are okay, but you can actually buy replacement fixings from the internet. Honda use them quite extensively on their fairing panels, so they're not difficult to get. So they literally just push in place, and then you screw up the plastic inserts. which, just like a raw plug, expands the inside, and that holds them, not particularly securely, but holds them in place. So I'm going to stop the video there, because I've got to go and fit this little bracket around the other side where you won't see it, and obviously fit the air duct holder and the bracket on the other side. So once they're done, I'll be back shortly, and we'll make a start on fitting the top fairing. Okay, that's the brackets on the other side. There's only one last thing to fit, and that's the actual air intake tubes themselves. Again, they just slide on and they're just held in place by this self-tapping screw that goes into a little speed nut, but they are quite essential for positioning the fairing, so we will be needing them. It's all starting to get there. Okay, so the top fairing is held on basically by these 2 points here, which bolt on the screen, and as you can see, not a very good fit. These have obviously bent in. In fact, I think that side is a bit more bent in than the other, so we're going to need to do some manipulating. But first, we've got to fit the screen onto the top fairing, and this is one of those really awkward jobs that needs lots of measuring, 3 pairs of hands, and you need to take your time on it. Now fortunately I've already got the top mounts drilled here, so we can fit those in, and then it's just a case of lining up the other holes. And what I'm going to use to hold the fairing in are these number plate bolts, little plastic number plate bolts. They're great because they don't put any undue stress on the fiberglass or the plastic for the fairing, for the screen even. So let's just pop them in. I'm only going to do them up finger tight because we will need to manipulate things a little bit. Seems to be the word of the day, doesn't it? Manipulate. Now, I must admit, I'm not really a fan of black screens, but it's what I've got. So, there we go. Right. So that's the screen done in place. Really the trick is get the 2 top mounts in, and then the rest will follow. Okay, I've got a selection of drill bits here. I know I'm going to knock. So let's start off. Just going to, although the actual bolts themselves need a 5mm hole, I think it is, I'm just going to start by drilling some pilot holes just to check everything's in the right place. Really is a case of check, and drill. So how does that one look? The screens are never ever a perfect fit in these fairings. You always end up with a bit of a gap around them, but don't think that one looks too bad. So, actually. It's a 6mm hole I require for these. It really is one of those jobs where you just need to take your time and keep checking as you go along. Like I said, you never really get a perfect fit with these screens. So, I'm going to carry on playing with this because I'm sure you don't want to watch me checking, drilling, checking, drilling, checking, drilling. It will go on forever. So we'll come back once I've actually got the screen all mounted. So I've fitted the screen, and at the moment the top fairing is just sort of loosely sitting on the bike. I've put the bolts in through here, and we just need to secure it at the top through the fairing mount. Now normally there are some rubber gaskets just behind the actual screen on the fairing mount. Now I haven't got those, but what I have got is the remains of a wing mirror, and that's the shape that fits on here. So I'm going to make up some rubber gaskets that fit here, and what I've got a nice thick sheet of rubber. So we're just going to put this on the rubber, draw around it, cut it out, and then using a gasket punch, I'm going to punch out the holes. Now I've already done that because unfortunately this bench isn't actually rigid enough to use the gasket punch. But basically you just put the gasket punch on there and whack it with a big hammer. So here's one in true Blue Peter fashion that I made earlier. So we're just going to slip that onto the fairing mount, or the screen mount, and that sits there. It also takes up the space, and it will stop the screen cracking by being directly against the metal, give it a bit of vibration. I'm just going to put a couple of bolts. Now what I'm going to use for washers on the outside are these roofing bolts. You just pick them up from Screwfix. So they're a slightly domed washer, and they come with a rubber sort of washer already glued to them or bonded to them, and then we can put those just in there. They're not too obtrusive, and then a couple of 10mm nuts, which of course I've got somewhere. Here we go. Actually, I could do with some washers as well, which I haven't got, but I'll fit those a bit later on. So that's the top fairing sort of mounted here, and then on the top. I'm not going to do the front bolt here until we've got the rest of the fairing panels on, because it may be that I need to move it up and down to line everything up. And then once everything lines up, I can mark inside, which is going to be fun because it's going to be a case of getting your hand up here with a pen to try and mark the position. And then bolt it in place. So, top fairing on. Let's go and make a start on the bottom fairing. Now I've fitted the belly pan on. It's just held in place loosely with a couple of Zeus fasteners, and I've actually secured it to the bracket on the other side. What we now need to do is make the bracket that goes from here to the frame somewhere. And normally there'd be a bracket that comes off the side stand and goes round to the fairing. I haven't got that on this side stand, so I've got a bit of an issue, but I think it might be easier if I move the camera around and I will show you in a bit more detail exactly what the problem is. Now that we've moved you around a bit, hopefully you can see the problem. What we need is a bracket that basically goes from this part of the frame to these holes here, or one of these holes here on the belly pan, to stop this bit flapping around. And it does tend to flap around. It's rather close to the exhaust as well, so you really don't, you want it mounted quite rigidly. On my other race bike, all I've done is I've taken the side stand off and I've made a very simple bracket that just comes down, avoids the chain and fits on the fairing. But with this being a track bike, the actual side stand is quite handy for storing it, and obviously on a track day there's nothing to stop you using a bike with a side stand, whereas with a race bike you're not allowed to keep the side stand on. So what I want to do is I want to try and come up with a bracket that will actually avoid the chain, secure that on, but also avoid the side stand. And we've got this bit at the back of the side stand that's going to get in the way and cause us a bit of a problem. So I'm going to have to do a bit of scratching, head scratching and thinking about this. But the first thing we need to do is let's take the stand off so we can get a better idea of what we've got to work with. Also, if I did decide I want the bracket to be designed in such a way that if I wanted to take the side stand off, I can, and just use some shorter bolts to hold the bracket in place. So you can see there's absolutely nothing anywhere on the frame that I could mount a bracket to. I suppose I could cut the frame or drill into the frame and tap it and have a nice simple bracket coming off there. But I think we're probably better off having something that mounts these two holes here, because I really don't want to start drilling into the frame and altering it. So I think it's going to be a case of a bit of cardboard and good old Sharpie and scissors, and I'm going to have to come up with some sort of bracket that basically fits in here and will avoid the side stand, avoid the frame, and still be rigid enough to stop this flapping around. So yeah, I'm going to go away and have a little bit of a play with this, and we'll see what we can come up with. So let me switch you off, and because you really don't want to watch me sitting here going no, no. So we'll be back shortly. Well, it's taken a few attempts, but as you can see, clears the stand. So what we need to make is going to be something this sort of shape. So I need to lengthen that a little bit. But basically it's going to be something along those lines. So now to go and try and make this out of metal. And I think we're going to call it a day on the video here, and you'll just have to wait until the next video to see the fairings fully fitted. So until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.